Hello everyone. We are going to talk about respiratory structure of lecture 4 of respiratory system. Um, the major function of respiratory system is to supply body with oxygen and dispose of CO2, which is a waste product of cellular respiration. They involve both respiratory and circulatory systems and also function in olfaction and speech. There are four uh, processes. Pulmonary ventilation, which is basically breathing, is movement of air into and out of lungs. External respiration involves oxygen and CO2 exchange between lungs and blood. Circulatory system involves transport of oxygen and CO2 in blood. And internal respiration involves oxygen and CO2 exchange between systemic and blood vessels and tissues. Major organs are nose, nasal cavity, and paranasal sinuses, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, and their branches and lungs, and alveoli. Functions of nose is to provide an airway for respiration, moistens and warms entering air, filters and cleans inspired air, serves as a resonating chamber for speech, and lastly houses olfactory receptors. The nose has two areas, namely external nose and nasal cavity. External nose contains root, bridge, dorsum nasi, and apex, and nostrils bounded by ali laterally. Nasal cavity is posterior to external nose and is divided by midline nasal septum. Posterior nasal apertures open into nasal pharynx, and roof are made of ethmoid and sphenoid bones, and floor is made of hard and soft pellets. Nasal vestibules is a nasal cavity superior to nostrils. Here, hairs filter coarse particles from inspired air. Rest of nasal cavity are lined with mucous membranes that are olfactory mucosa and respiratory mucosa. Olfactory mucosa contains olfactory epithelium. Respiratory mucosa contains pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. Mucus and serous secretions contain lysozymes and defensins. And cilia moves contaminated mucus posteriorly to throat, and inspired air are warmed by fluxes of capillaries and veins, and sensory nerve endings trigger sneezing. Nasal conchae contains superior, middle, and inferior parts, and they have a raised area medially from lateral walls to increase mucosal area and to enhance air turbulence. Paranasal sinuses are located in frontal, sphenoid, ethmoid, and maxillary bones, and they lighten skull, secrete mucus, and help to warm and moisten air. Pharynx is a muscular tube from base of skull to the cervical vertebra C6 and connects nasal cavity and mouth to neonyx and esophagus. And um, they are composed of skeletal muscle, and there are three areas, mainly nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. Nasopharynx is an air passageway posterior to nasal cavity, and lining is made of pseudostratified columnar epithelium, and soft palate and ulva closes nasopharynx during swallowing. Um, Vaginal tonsil is at the posterior wall, and auditory tubes drain and equalize pressure in middle ear. Oropharynx is a passageway for food and air from level of soft palate to epiglottis. Lining is made of um, stratified squamous epithelium, and palatine tonsils and lingual tonsils exist here. Laryngopharynx is a passageway for food and air, and they are located posterior to upright epiglottis, and they extend to neonyx, were continuous with esophagus, and they are lined with stratified squamous epithelium. Neonics attach to hyoid bone and opens into meningopharynx and continues with trachea. Functions of neonics is to provide air and food into proper channels and voice production and houses vocal folds. Neonics has nice cartilage. Uh, Most of them are hyaline cartilage except epiglottis. Thyroid cartilage exhibits with meningeal prominence, which we call that as Adam's apple, and there are ring-shaped cricoid cartilage, paired arytenoid, uh, cuneiform, and corniculate cartilages. Epiglottis are made of elastic cartilage, and they covers laryngeal inlet during swallowing and covered in taste buds containing mucosa. Vocal ligaments are located in deep to laryngeal mucosa and attach arytenoid cartilages to thyroid cartilage and contain elastic fibers and form core of true vocal cords. Glottis is an opening between vocal cords and folds vibrates to produce sound as air rushes up from lungs. Neonics has false vocal cords. They are not a part of sound production and help to close glottis during swallowing. A superior portion of epithelium of neonics is made up of stratified squamous epithelium, and inferior to vocal folds are made of pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. Voice production is a speech intermittent release of expired air while opening and closing of glottis. Um, Chambers of pharynx and oral, nasal, and sinus cavities amplify and enhance sound quality. Sound is shaped into language by muscles of pharynx, tongue, soft palate, and lips. Larynx has a vocal folds may act as a sphincter to prevent air passage. Example can be abnormal muscles contract and intra-abdominal pressure rises, and this helps to empty rectum or stabilize trunk during heavy lifting. Trachea is a windpipe from larynx into mediastinum. Its wall is composed of three layers. Mucosa is a ciliated pseudostratified epithelium with goblet cells. Submucosa is a connective tissue with seromucous glands. Adventitia is an outermost layer made of connective tissue and contains C-shaped rings of hyaline cartilage so that it can always open structure. Trachea has tracheal muscle which connects posterior part of cartilage rings and contract during coughing to expel mucus and branches into two main bronchi and finally 23 orders of branching to bronchial tree. Conducting joint structures are trachea and then into right and left main primary bronchi, and each main bronchus enters helium of one lung, and right main branch is wider, shorter, more vertical than left. Each main bronchus branches into loba, which is secondary bronchi, three on right and two on left, and each lobar bronchus supplies one nerve, and then each lobar bronchus branches into segmental tertiary bronchi. Segmental bronchi divide repeatedly, and branches become smaller and smaller to become bronchioles of a diameter less than 1 millimeter. Terminal bronchioles are smallest, less than 0.5 millimeter diameter. Conducting joint structures are from bronchi through bronchioles, and structural change occurs here. Cartilage rings become irregular plates. In bronchioles, elastic fibers replace cartilage, and epithelium changes from pseudo stratified columni to cuboidal. And cilia and goblet cells become sparse, and relative amount of smooth muscle increases. This allows constriction. Respiratory zone begins as terminal bronchioles and respiratory bronchioles and alveoli ducts and finally alveoli sac. Alveoli sacs contain clusters of alveoli of about 300 million alveoli, and that makes up most of the lung volume, and they are the sites of gas exchange. Alveoli is surrounded by fine elastic fibers and pulmonary capillaries. Respiratory membrane have alveolar and capillary walls and have their fused basement membranes about 0.5 micrometer thickness. Gas exchange occurs across the membrane by simple diffusion, and alveoli walls are single layer of squamous epithelium of type 1 alveoli cells. And they are scattered cuboidal type 2 alveoli cells. They secrete surfactant and antimicrobial proteins. Alveoli pores connect adjacent alveoli and equalize air pressure throughout the lung, and alveoli macrophages keep alveoli surfaces sterile, and 2 million dead macrophages per hour are carried by cilia to throat. And do you know that you swallow that all the time? Lungs occupy all thoracic cavity except mediastinum. Root site is the site of vascular and bronchial attachments to mediastinum, and costal surfaces at the anterior, lateral, and posterior surfaces, and they are composed of primarily of alveoli, and stroma is an elastic connective tissue which provides elasticity. And apex of the lung are at the superior tip, deep to clavicle, and base is at the inferior surface, and they rest on diaphragm. Helium is on mediastinal surface, and this is the site for entry or exit of blood vessels, bronchi, lymphatic vessels, and nerves. Left lung is smaller than right, and cardiac nuts has concavity for heart, and are separated into superior and inferior lobes by oblique fissure. Pulmonary circulation involves pulmonary arteries deliver systemic venous blood to lungs for oxygenation and branch extensively and feed into pulmonary capillary networks. Pulmonary veins carry oxygenated blood from respiratory zones to heart. Blood supply involves lung capillary endothelium contains the enzyme that acts on substances in blood, which is the renin. So that enzyme is called angiotensin converting enzyme, activate the blood pressure hormone. Bronchial arteries provide oxygenated blood to lung tissue, and they arise from aorta and enter lungs at helium. And parts of systemic circulation is to supply all lung tissue except the alveoli. Pulmonary veins carry most venous blood back to heart. Pleura is 18 double-layered serosa and divides thoracic cavity into two pleural compartments and mediastinum. Parietal pleura are on thoracic wall, superior surface of diaphragm, around the heart, and between lungs. Visceral pleura are on external lung surface and contains pleural fluid that fill pleural cavity and provide lubrication and surface tension to assist in expansion and recoil of the lung.